I'm Matt Falco, and joining me today is Carolyn Englehart Allender Jennings.
Right.
It is May 12th, 2009. Thank you very much, Carolyn.
Yes.
For being with us today and sharing your memories. Now, could you just tell me a little bit about where you're from and where you were born, and just a little bit about your background?
Okay, first of all, I want to tell you why I ended up in Carroll County as a baby. My mother was going to Frostburg College up in, I think it's Allegheny County, and Carroll County schools came up to recruit teachers. She was a music major. They offered her a job down here in Carroll County. She accepted, and she was a music teacher for Hampstead and Manchester schools. Okay, they had one music teacher for both schools, and that was my mother at that time. Okay, now you want me to go on, or you want to ask me more questions?
Absolutely.
So in the course of events, she met her future husband, my dad, and he was Joseph William Allender. Her name was Hazel. I haven't lived all my life in Carroll County, but I am a native because I've moved back here. I've taken up kind of where I left off. I lived 35 years in Montgomery County. That's where I reared my children. And I'm very happy that I did live there then because they had an excellent school system. As far as my life in Hampstead, I lived right on Main Street. In the 1300 block, I looked at the house number as I came up the road today. Where I lived is now an apartment building. My dad had a business there, or it was called J.H. Allender's Sons Company. It was him and his brother. But his brother died very young, so then it was just my dad. Plumbing, heating, roofing, tinning. He was a busy man. So to make it a little more specific, the next block has Resch Family Dentistry, if you've ever noticed that as you go down the street. Coming north, the big building on the corner of Rhineman Avenue and Main Street. That was my dad's, well, his business was there, and we lived on the whole second floor. Huge apartment. I had a very carefree, happy childhood. I have vivid memories of sitting in the front yard, which is now a parking lot, and making mud pies. I had playmates up and down the block, and to mention a few of them, Tab Martin, his brother Woody, they lived up in the next block. On my block, just down the street, Bobby Hyson, Dickie Murray, and then the Resch kids, where the dentistry is now. And they all lived in that house. I mean, we just had a blast. We did. We didn't have a care in the world. I was reared during the Depression, the early 30s, but I don't have any memory of any hardships because my dad was in business. He was doing well. I know other people were having problems, but I didn't. You know, I was just fat, dumb, and happy, so to speak. Now, I was trying to think of some of the things that I did that were fun. I walked to school, and sometimes I walked to lunch. I walked home for lunch. And the school was right now where the senior center is. Do you know where I mean? Well, not the senior center, apartments is what I meant to say.
Okay.
They left the facade. It looks exactly the same in the front. That was my school. In those days, there was no kindergarten, no 12th grade, just 1st through 11th. That was Carroll County for you. My parents expected me to go to college. Both my parents did. My dad graduated from Western Maryland, which is now McDaniel. My mother graduated from Frostburg, as I told you. She became a teacher. They expected me to go to college. They did not think I was getting an academic education. So they took me out of Hampstead School when I was 15 years old, sent me down to St. Mary's, which is now St. Mary's College of Maryland. It was St. Mary's Female Seminary then. And that is the site of the first settlement and first capital of Maryland. I learned a lot about the history of Maryland. I was so homesick when I went down there. I can't begin to tell you how homesick. 15 years old. But as it turned out, it was for the better, because they put the screws to me big time. Taught me how to study, which I didn't know. And after I graduated from there, top of my class of 15 young ladies, and most of them had another year of school than I did, because most of the students came from Baltimore and Washington. But I buckled down, let me tell you. I knew I better. Then I went to the University of Maryland, majored in Spanish and English, and graduated in 4 years. So anyhow, getting back a little bit to my childhood, I want to tell you what the biggest thing of my life was, and it was the Hampstead Carnival. Everybody loved it, and I want to tell you where it was located. If you know where the True Value hardware store is, and the Hampstead post office. Do you know where that is? Anybody? That's where the carnival, on both sides of that alley. It was empty. I mean, it was no buildings whatsoever. And once a year, every summer, we'd have a carnival. The firemen sponsored it. And they spent weeks building pavilions. And my dad would always have his display. He also sold appliances. You can see the era with the washing machines, the ringers, and
So this was the storefront?
yeah, C.J. Taylor and
great.
Sons Company. That was my dad's business. And see, they couldn't leave the pavilions up. They had to rebuild them every single summer for the carnival. And of course, where I lived in the apartment was right next to the carnival ground. I could hear them out there banging and building for a long time, you know. And, oh, you wouldn't believe the anticipation. They'd have the Ferris wheel and the swings and all that stuff, you know, like they do now. Only it wasn't, I mean, the machines weren't as ritzy as they are now. All right, another thing that we did when I got a little older, but before I went away to school, was to go roller skating up at the roller rink up in Hanover. Where that is, I don't know. When I moved back here from Montgomery County and I go to Hanover, I look to the left, I don't know whatever happened to it. I think there's a cemetery now. But I had a kind of a boyfriend. And He's the only one who had a car. So we'd pile in there like on Saturday, and he'd always say to me, Carolyn, where do you want to go? He'd always ask me, and I'd have to sit next to him. And I'd always say, I want to go to the roller rink. And I was quite the roller skater, you know. So this is when I was like 14 and 15. And I guess probably when I came home for vacation, we went up too. So that was my big thing about having a good time. Also, in connection with the carnival, they always had a parade like they do now. And I was a Girl Scout, and I got to march in the parade. And if you think that wasn't big time, it was a big thing in my life. I do want to mention something about school. Mr. Bosley, he was our crossing guard, and he was a legend, let me tell you. Everybody, he stood down there right in the middle of, well, it's Route 30 now, right in the middle of the road, and directed anybody that needed to cross the street, and I always did because I lived on the other side. And his wife was a custodian. I could tell you, I think, the name of every teacher I had up at Hampstead School. Some of them came, Mr., my second grade teacher. I think she spent her whole life up there. I could go through and tell you the names of the teachers. So you kind of cherish those things, you know what I mean? Now, do you have any questions so far?
Sure. I just have a few questions.
I'm not through yet.
Okay, well, continue on.
Okay, well, after St. Mary's, by the way, at that time, in order to graduate from high school, and see, they had 2 years of college, too. You got an Associate of Art. It was excuse me, I got a runny nose. That's
No problem at all.
part of my personality. You had to write, down at St. Mary's, you had to write a thesis about the history of Maryland. And I got an award from the Ark and Dove Society on mine. My dad was so proud of me. After I got home from vacation, he had me go to his Rotary Club and read my thesis. And since I've been coming to the Senior Center, I've given talks about Maryland history to the ladies and gentlemen. Usually around Maryland Day, which is in March. And I know every county in Maryland, the derivation of the names. And anyhow, Maryland's a wonderful state. It's called American Miniature. I'm putting some stuff in I hadn't planned to say. But it's got a varied climate and topography. Goes from the mountains up in Garrett County down to southern Maryland, which is very temperate. We used to go swimming in the St. Mary's River around Easter time. That's how warm the water would be. And that is one gorgeous spot, too. After St. Mary's, I went to the University of Maryland, as I told you. Graduated. I could not, at that time, get a job in Spanish, teaching Spanish. I was very upset. But French was what was being taught then, and Latin. Spanish didn't come into its own until sometime later. So they wanted me to take an elementary job. So I went to Towson that summer, took elementary ed, crash course, procedures, and ended up, I got a job over at 7th District in Baltimore County, Parkton, and that's where I taught. It was during this time that one of my college friends, Jenny, called me, and she was always fixing people up. She wanted me to take this blind date for a fraternity party. It was summer school. I said, forget it. I had been going with the midshipmen at Maryland, not Maryland, the Naval Academy. When I went to Maryland, I meant at the Naval Academy, and that was kind of serious. I didn't want to take that blind date, but I did. I took it, and that turned out to be the man I married. He had just gotten out of the service and had gone back to college. He had been an Air Force lieutenant. He had flown 36 missions over Germany. And do I miss him? I'm now a widow. He had a stroke. I took care of him over 5 years. I don't want to talk any more much about him because it makes me so sad. But anyhow, that was the guy. I didn't know I was going to marry him. In fact, I thought he was kind of boring. That first date at the fraternity house, and it was Sigma Nu, by the way. But I did eventually marry him. And that's what we looked like back in those days. And the reception was at the Richard McAllister Hotel up in Hanover.
Very, very nice.
And the wedding was at St. Mark's Lutheran, right on Main Street in Hampstead. And since I moved back up here again, I go to the same church. Now, why am I back up here again? I lived in Silver Spring. I liked it over there. I had a lot of college friends from the University of Maryland and sorority sisters. Anyhow, my dad, who, as I told you, was in business, showed you that picture, and the way he invested his money was in land. During the 30s and 40s, farmers, a lot of them, were going bankrupt. My dad bought 4 contiguous farms from Black Rock Road over to Route 30. And I inherited over 60 acres.
Wow.
My husband came home, he loved it up here because Piney Branch Golf Course, and he was a golf nut, and he wanted to move up here. I said, forget it, I'm not moving up to those boonies, because when I left here, I promised myself, no way am I ever living back there. But he loved it up here. He kept talking about it and bringing his friends up here to play golf. Little by little, he talked me into it. And I will say I couldn't be happier for having moved up here. Now, I don't really have much more to say unless you've got questions.
How long have you belonged to the senior center?
Well, my husband's now been dead 10 years, and I used to bring him up in the wheelchair. And thank God for that good bus service we had. Cats, they had buses with lifts and so forth. Mm-hmm. And then my 2 daughters, his daughters, bought him a lift van. So then I got a young man to help me, and we'd bring him up in that on Tuesdays. So how long has that been? Probably 15 years, on and off I've been coming. Mm-hmm. After he died, I don't know what I would have done without this senior center. It's very lonely being a widow. if you've been married. If you've never been married, then you don't know the difference. But you can tell, I'm hardly quiet. I like to get around, I like to talk to people, I like to meet people. And the senior center really filled a need for me. And I come up here on Tuesdays. I used to dance, clog, have a blast. But after my husband died, I had to have both my knees replaced because taking care of him for over 5 years literally wore me out. I mean, I had help. And I got him in some VA veteran services, but I tell you, I could have used help 24/7. So I got both my knees replaced at once.
Wow.
You know, and after rehab and 2 weeks down at Kernan Hospital in Baltimore, I kept getting better and better, and I could dance, and I was clogging, I tap dancing. That was something else in my childhood. My mother took me to Baltimore every Saturday for tap toe and ballet. But then my sisters, who are twins, were born when I was 10 years old. So all those good lessons stopped. But once you know how to tap dance, you never forget it. But then, 2004, I broke my hip up at my daughter's house up in New York. So that pretty well clinched my dancing. I'm now getting some more treatments on my back. I never give up. So, any more questions?
I guess the last question I just have is in terms of your childhood. Now, could you just describe for us today your fondest memory from childhood? Because you talked about roller skating and you talked about that. What would you say is your fondest memory?
Fondest memories? Something I'll never forget. When I was in first grade, and my teacher's name was Miss Boyce, instead of having desks, we had tables in there in the first grade. I'll never forget. One time when she left the room, I got up on top of the table and danced, tap danced. So that's kind of a fond memory. I don't know that I have the fondest memory. I have a lot of good memories. Because like I told you, I didn't have a care in the world. Not really. I mean, it was a simple life up here. We didn't have the worries that you guys have. Wasn't any drug dealing and things that worry parents today. We didn't have that. Dickie Murray and I used to climb trees. I guess I was kind of a tomboy. I mean, we had a blast, truly. Any other questions?
That'll do it. That'll do it for today. I'd like to thank you again, Carolyn, for sharing your memories with us today. It really has been great.
Well, when Renee, our director, asked for volunteers, I thought, well, I think I can do that, And I have a really good knowledge of the state that I live in, not just the community. Mm-hmm. Having lived all my life in Maryland. But I'm glad to be back. And let me tell you, I'm glad I lived in Montgomery County. But when you meet people over there, nothing lasts. Everybody comes from somewhere else over there. Most people came to work for the U.S. government or the Atomic Energy Lab or, but I tell you, my kids got a good public school education, a good education. And they've all graduated from college. So,
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. It really
Has
has.
it really?
It has. It has.
Okay.